The forests of the Pokemon world are dark and dangerous, filled with a mass of Pokemon that could ensure you never make it to the other side. It could be as simple as a poke from the poisonous stinger of a Weedle. You could be entombed within a wooden coffin as Trevenant traps you within their domain. Or you could fall victim to a Zoroark upset with your entry into their territory. These forests are all over the world of Pokemon, but how dangerous are they really? How do they function, and how can you stay alive and make it to the other side in one piece? Howdy there, I'm Curlic, and I've already dug through a number of regions and their ecology, and I even had a video just like this talking about the oceans of Pokemon's world, but now we're here to talk about the forests, dark, winding, maze-like forests that we have to traverse through in the middle of our routes to even get to the next town or city, making it absolutely necessary on our trainer journey. These forests have been shown in the games and even in the anime to not only have a slew of different Pokemon, but even contain massive swarms and even some of the most dangerous Pokemon of every single region. Because of this, we're simply going to go region by region, and we'll see just how dangerous every forest is, and you can tell me which ones you believe that you could survive without a Pokemon to help you. Yes, this makes it vastly different. You are out of potions, there are no more revives, and your Pokemon have all fainted. You're running through the forest to get them home, or maybe you're not even a Pokemon trainer. Maybe you're a Pokemon contestant and your Pokemon are simply not fit for battle. We'll talk about the Pokemon found within these forests, what their behavior is like, tie our Pokemon to some real-life science and nature and their inspirations, and then determine just how dangerous every single forest is. Can you survive walking through it, or should you stay incredibly far away? And you gotta be careful here, because not only are the Pokemon themselves dangerous, some of these forests are absolutely just mazes. So how about we begin with the OG forest, the number one first forest you ever go through, at least if you play the original games, the Viridian Forest. A deep and sprawling forest that extends around Viridian City, a natural maze filled with bug Pokemon. Many people may also become lost inside. What's fun about that is that they actually do show within the games that people do get lost, as they are not only wandering, scattered throughout the forest, but you can also pick up a number of items within the forest. The trees in this area have grown so dense that light actually has trouble getting through, and because of this, the forest does seem dark and gloomy at certain parts. Though there are some areas where the sunlight just barely manages to peek through, which is perfect for the grass Pokemon that need their sunlight. But because of it being such a dark and shady environment, we do have a slew of bug Pokemon. Though they are not incredibly powerful, they do cause our status conditions that can be paralysis or poison. We are warned about this as a player with a sign to actually stock up on paralyzed heals or antidotes, which is not only a warning to teach us how to play the game itself, but also showing us the potential dangers that exist here. After all, you shouldn't be going into tall grass without a Pokemon to help defend you. There are a number of Pokemon that are typically seen as prey species here. They're found within the tall grass, in the brush off the path that we can traverse, and at least within the anime, we know that there are larger colonies off the beaten path. For starters, Pokemon such as Caterpie and Metapod are found here, and they aren't really a threat unless you mess with them too much, because just about any animal can be a threat when cornered. Even then though, Caterpie is just going to string shot you and eat leaf until it eventually evolves into Metapod. But it does have that nasty odor that it can emit from the horn on its head, which is actually very reminiscent of giant swallowtail caterpillars, which are known for their strong, foul-smelling defense mechanism. When threatened, they can retract their osmeterium, which is a forked gland that releases a scent similar to spoiled orange or citrus fruits. The scent is strong enough to deter predators, making them an effective defense mechanism against attacks, making it a significant part of the caterpillar's survival strategy. And while every single Pokemon has multiple inspirations, we have another visual inspiration with Caterpie being the Spice Bush Swallowtail Caterpillar. The fact that these two inspirations are both Swallowtail Caterpillars is actually incredibly fascinating to me, but really, we see just how much inspiration it pulls from real-life creatures, and how its ability to create this odor to deter threats is actually just a real thing that's been translated into Pokemon, but we can move on from Caterpie because ultimately it's not a threat to us. Even when it does evolve into Metapod, the closest that it becomes to being a threat is if it's used as a bludgeoning weapon and then left behind at a crime scene. This is also a great opportunity to tell you that I will be considering every single Pokemon that we find through all versions of a game or region that we are going to then talk about. Viridian Forest, for example, is not only found in the 1st generation, but is also found in the 3rd, 4th, and 7th generations with the releases of Fire Red Leaf Green, Heart Gold Soul Silver, and the Let's Go Pikachu EV games. What does that even mean for our analysis of this forest and our survivability of it? It means actually a lot, as it wasn't until the Let's Go games that Butterfree was actually found in the games, despite us knowing through the anime that they existed canonically within the forest somewhere. The greater danger regarding Butterfree is that they will release scales all over the place, whether it be on accident or on purpose, and those scales will cause a number of different afflictions, such as poison, sleep, or paralysis. All 3 of those things being incredibly horrible when you're in the middle of a forest. These scales are constantly released as they flap their wings and aren't really a problem, I'd say, unless you inhale them in large amounts, such as when a large colony of Butterfree hatch from their cocoons and then fly over your head. Sorry, Ash, that's another death for the death counter. As for our other common buggy friend hiding in the brush, Weedle. They are a little bit more dangerous. The stinger on its head is 2 inches or 5 centimeters long, and this is just the average considering that Pokemon across the board can vary in size. For a great and terrifying comparison, the giant Ichneumoniid wasp, oh my god, has a stinger, or actually more correctly, an ovipositor that is longer than its body and ranges between 2 to 4 inches or 5 to 10 centimeters. The greatest differences here, though, are that not only is it actually used to inject their eggs into hosts for babies to consume live as they hatch, and the fact that Weedle is still a foot tall or 0.3 meters, weighing in at about 7.1 pounds or 3.2 kilograms on average, making it so that way the stinger may not be longer, but it is absolutely thicker. I feel like it's less of a stinger and more of like a hole puncher at that point. I'm just saying, if you put me in a room between the giant Ichneumoniid wasp or the Weedle, I'm gonna choose the Ichneumoniid wasp because those things don't actually lay eggs in anything such as people or pets. They're just gonna choose caterpillars, grubs, or any other form of larvae. Now, Weedle here actually doesn't care about you or me. It also just wants to eat leaf, hide, and stay alive as long as possible, so that way it can eventually evolve into Kakuna. And unlike Metapod, Kakuna is actually able to defend itself to some capacity, since it can still use its stinger while in its state. It seems a little irrelevant considering the fact that it's still unable to really move freely, so I don't think it's super effective unless somebody tries to grab it from the front. And because people did want to grab it, touch it, and actually weigh it, because we have to get our measurements somehow, if you do touch it, it actually gives off a warmth. This is likely because they're undergoing their metamorphosis, which in turn is causing a large release of energy, or at least enough for us to feel. And yes, not every single Pokemon evolves by leveling up, or actually evolve by a Pokemon's standards. They go through metamorphosis. If you want to know more about all the hidden ways that Pokemon evolve, I do have a video on that which you should check out, such as Cubone evolving once it stops crying about its dead mother. Woo! It's just a big old metaphor for depression and grieving all in all. But moving on, since Kakuna are pretty simple and easy to avoid, especially when they hang from their tree branches from their silk, you just need to stay on the paths made within the forests to avoid the very nasty first real threat that we have, being Beedrill. Here's the thing that is sometimes hardest for people to come to terms with. Beedrill are necessary to the world of Pokemon, similar to how many different types of bees or hornets or the hundreds and thousands of different types of insects that there are out there. They're all super vital because while we love butterflies and the fat butts of bumblebees, don't get me wrong, I like to give them a little pet every once in a while, they aren't the only pollinators of our world. and Beedrill here is noted to be a pollinator. And while they haven't been confirmed to have traditional beehives, they do have places where they like to rest, protect their Kakuna and Weedle brethren, and engage in aggressive territorial violence against anyone that is not their own insect kind. This is why Beedrill aren't typically that dangerous. Don't disturb any of their kind or enter their territory, and you will be just fine. Don't think about all the people that had to travel through the forest before you to make the path that you now walk on. They're now in a better place. Though not everything is hunky-dory, even if you do manage to stay far away from the Beedrill territory, because you will still have a small chance of running into one on their hunts for food. They may not always look for living prey, but Pokemon such as Teddiursa, who will trespass on their property for some honey, is one Pokemon who will get attacked and brought back to the Beedrill's home for a future meal. And no, it's not getting served at the dinner table, it's getting served at the dinner table. At some point, I do actually hope that we get to see some sort of queen for Beedrill specifically. I don't care if it gets an actual form, I don't care about anything else, just show us whether it actually has a queen or a monarch of some sort. If you do want to give it some sort of alternate form, can't really be a mega, so it might need to be some sort of regional variant that gets an alternate evolution if it eats honey or, you know, some sort of weird thing that Pokemon wants to do. They're also stated to fly at incredibly high speeds, they will stab you repeatedly like a maniac once they get you, and if you do manage to make multiple of them angry, they will swarm you and wherever you decide to hide until nighttime, likely because it just gets cold and bees like to return to their hives at night. They're honestly just incredibly scary Pokemon that are about the size of my German Shepherd. I mean, do you realize how terrifying that is? Imagine holding a medium-sized dog in your arms, and instead of it being that medium-sized dog, it was a Beedrill, ready to sting you multiple times over until you're Swiss cheese. Moving on from that terrifying thought, though, there are more docile Pokemon within these woods as well. We have to have some level of good news between all the horror. This would actually include Pidgey and its slightly less docile evolution, Pidgeotto. Pidgey is no different than your average little birds that may swoop around the areas you walk and stick to tree lines, because when you stick to tree lines, you get easy pickings upon any meals that happen across your path. They're also known to be so docile that if any enemy were to attack a Pidgey, it would rather fly away than actually fight. Though that isn't to say that it can't fight, it is able to send up dust clouds and whirlwinds in order to flush out prey, such as Weedle and Caterpie, assuming that it can get past their defenses as we've previously discussed. Meanwhile, there is Pidgeotto, who is a bit more of a problem, as it defends its territory spanning over 60 miles or 100 kilometers with ferocity. They'll likely be flying overhead from time to time, which isn't too much of an issue, and while it primarily chooses to have Pokemon such as Execute or Magikarp as its meal, it is a bird that is 3'7" or 1.1 meters and 66 pounds or 30 kilograms. Now take what I'm about to say with a little bit of a grain of salt, because some birds in real life are not able to carry anything heavier than 3 pounds due to weaker talons or legs despite their large size. But other birds, such as the harpy eagle, who is 3 to 3.5 feet, or roughly 2 meters in size, and weigh a third as much as Pidgeotto, can carry up to 40 pounds or 18 kilograms, which has at least been recorded once. Now, just because Pidgeotto is, let's say, about triple the weight, doesn't mean that it can carry triple the amount as the harpy eagle. Instead, we might be able to say that since Pidgeotto is heavier, it does have more muscle at the very least, and it is a Pokemon, they've got some pretty good strength to them, so let's just say it could carry at least 1.5 times the amount. This would put it at a rough estimate of Pidgeotto being able to carry about 60 pounds or 27 kilograms, which is really close to the supposed average weight of a 10-year-old, being the age in which children in the Pokemon world typically begin their journey. Of course, that is still just an average and everyone is different, but either way, it's close enough that if a Pidgeotto was feeling a little territorial, it would drag the nearest child in the sky, and you can imagine what would happen next. Alternatively, though, it is really cool to think about the fact that these numbers line up decently well with Pidgeotto being able to fly us across the region when we do use the Fly HM, which, that's not really a thing anymore. HMs are a thing of the past, and I hope they stay that way. Either way, I'm sure that's incredibly rare for a Pidgeotto to just pick someone off, as they're not the type of Pokemon to target humans. And as you do dig through the grass, you are bound to find our mascot of the franchise, Pikachu, who has a small chance of popping up. Now, Pikachu is stated to be a very intelligent creature. It can be very friendly and just enjoys eating berries whenever it can. The problem that we find with it, though, is that Pikachu can cause, through a collection of their kind, a large amount of electricity to appear in one area, which in turn will result in isolated storms, or at the very least, lightning striking down on their location. This is really nice for them because it recharges them without them having to actually give up any energy to do so, though the odds of you running into a group of Pikachu are minimal, unless you're in Pikachu Valley in Alola. You will have the risk of getting struck by lightning, but more importantly, there's the risk of what else may get struck by lightning, such as, let's say a group of Pikachu are under a tree. That is all that's necessary for the lightning to strike down and a forest fire to occur. Now, you not only have to deal with the tragedy that's occurring, but also the fact that there are probably going to be a slew of panicking Pokemon moving and escaping the area if they aren't the types to actually be able to put out the fire with water. It's not all bad at the very least, considering that it could be good for renewing the soil or even helping some trees, as they only release their seeds when a certain temperature is actually attained. What also helps is that the world of Pokemon has plenty of other grass-type Pokemon who can help replenish the life of a forest or nature as a whole. Ultimately, this makes it so our vibrant forests stay incredibly healthy. And there's going to be one example far later on at Alola that is a fantastic example of this. Meanwhile, still here in Kanto within the Viridian Forest, late at night you may hear the tick-tocking of Hoot Hoot or the glowing eyes of a Noctowl caught in the moonlight. These Pokemon are another non-threat in the end, at least to you and I. I say this because with these Pokemon being owls, they are not only eating insects, small mammals, but they're also potentially eating other birds in the area. Funny enough, at least within the Heart Gold game, you can't really run into any bug Pokemon at night, and this is likely because they're hiding away from the open areas that you and I walk through in order to make it harder for them to be caught and eaten by their predators. The exception to this, though, is when we headbutt some trees and find a slew of other creatures that are resting there or are in wait for any prey that they can ambush. One Pokemon simply existing as best as it can and trying to live to the next day is Ladybug, taking a little rest within the trees. It'll roam about outside of what we can see, taking in nectar and pollen outside the eyes of would-be predators. Even its evolution, Ledian, is flying around, but at least that Pokemon is a little bit stronger, but is more about throwing a ton of fists in order to try and defend itself and absorbing the moonlight, or rather starlight, as Pokemon likes to state it, in order to ensure it keeps itself and its Ladybug family healthy and safe. Camouflaged within green amongst the leaves is a predator stringing along its webs, Spinarak, and its evolution, Ariados. Now, Spinarak itself is fairly docile. Sure, it'll make its web and wait for something to fall into it, and then attack it if it's actually interested. If it's not, it's just gonna flick it away. And even if you and I run into its webs or bother it too much and it does decide to bite us, its poison isn't even strong enough to be considered lethal and will instead only weaken its foes, which is more than likely going to be your grass-type Pokemon or maybe some of its actual typical prey. The real problem is when you get into Ariados, who has the potential to be a very aggressive Pokemon. During the day, it'll stay in place on its web and just wait for prey to come to it. But at night, it will never stay in one place, walking around, hunting down its prey, and wrapping them up completely before they are brought to a very slow end. And while Ariados' information doesn't say it, I guarantee it eats in the same way that almost every other arachnid might, which is by injecting venom and enzymes into its prey, which then slowly turns them into liquid before actually sucking them up like a fresh soda, or I guess more aptly like a soup. They're also about 3.5 feet or 1.1 meters in length, so let's be honest, Ariados is pretty massive in terms of a threat to anything that it may deem as prey. Let's just hope it doesn't attach a string to us and follow us to our friends and family, as that's something that it might do, and then eat everybody. But back to less threatening Pokemon as we get Seedot. They're just sticking to tree limbs and sucking out the tree's nutrients before dropping down from being too heavy from the sheer amount of nutrition now packed inside of them. The greatest threat that they actually serve is if they drop down with their full 8.8 pounds or 4 kilograms in weight onto your head and potentially break your skull or neck. So maybe look up for, any Seedot hanging in the trees or any trees that are shaking. They also do like to polish themselves, which makes it super easy for Pokemon to spot them and then take them to new locations. That way they can be dropped off in new areas and actually spread their species. I've actually started coming up with this theory, or started believing in this theory at least, that Seedot who don't evolve actually do turn into regular trees, which is kind of held up by some other Pokemon, such as the Gossifleur being a Pokemon that is actually able to release seeds all over of different types of seeds not related to itself. Is it Gossifleur? It's not Gossifleur. I always mix up Gossifleur with Eldegoss for some reason. It's because their names are so similar. Moving on though, Shroomish are also apparently found in the trees when you shake them, but they're actually likely just being found near the roots of the tree, despite us headbutting the tree to shake them out. I say this because Shroomish are more akin to not only puffball mushrooms, but will also typically hide under fallen leaves while in the shade of trees, where it will then eat the composted soil within forests, which that is of course made up of any of the fallen and rotted leaves that come to the ground and have stayed there for quite some time. The danger with Shroomish, though, is that they are just like Butterfree in terms of their danger. Very indirect and a higher potential risk of great harm. This is because while they may shake their bodies to release spores, at least within Pokemon Snap, they may also do it when they are full of energy and very happy, not just when they feel like they are in danger. These same spores can make trees and weeds wilt and cause whole body pain if inhaled. This is very similar to valley fever, which can be caused by 2 known types of fungi. This in turn can cause a number of different symptoms, which can include fever, pain when breathing in, coughing, shortness of breath, headache, rash, joint pain mainly in the ankles, knees, and wrists, and a slew of other symptoms. So maybe don't stand near Shroomish when they release these spores. Also, a spore can be about 1/2500th of an inch, and this is the type of damage that they can do to our bodies. Big things, small packages. But we move on to Odium Wanderus, the only Pokemon with a Latin name being Oddish, and hopefully you don't really have to worry about it at all unless it's an absolute anomaly of an Oddish, because even if you do run into it, Oddish are far more scared of you than you should be scared of it, which is at already a 0, especially in the daytime, because they need to avoid the sun in order to make sure that they don't burn due to the direct sunlight, and there are plenty of plants or flowers that are actually like this and need to bloom at night in order to get what they need from the environment with less sunlight. And also this helps them avoid predators by moving around at night. Much like the Mandrake, Oddish will let out a shriek if you pull it from the ground, and all they're trying to do is find good, nutritious soil and some water so it can grow big and glossy leaves. Gentle creature all in all. Bellsprout, on the other hand, is a bit more aggressive all in all, mainly because it tends to move incredibly fast, and while it primarily decides it wants to eat bugs, it will try to reach out and grab anything that moves too close to it once it senses movement. It's probably not going to even attempt to eat you, but it will at least be a tripping hazard. Its evolutions, which are thankfully not found in this forest within the games, are the ones that you should worry about, and we'll get to them later. But our last Pokemon we find within Viridian Forest is Bulbasaur, a very gentle, kind, and caring Pokemon who is said to be great with kids and young Pokemon all around. Now, in traditional lore, or Pokédex entries, they're stated to be incredibly kind and very protecting creatures within the forests that they reside in, protecting the forest itself as well, not just its residents. Though within other locations, such as within the Lental region of Pokemon Snap, they're noted to need a lot of gentle care and protection so that way they can eventually grow up, evolve, and be able to protect other Pokemon. Otherwise, they're just basking in the sunlight and growing that sprout on their back. Now, there are technically swarms of Kricketune who are more active in the fall, just like real crickets are, in addition to a few other Pokemon if you actively play sounds from other games, but that's definitely not really normal. This is not a normal habitat for Pokemon such as Numel, which is one of them, so I won't be speaking about them here. With that though, looking at Viridian Forest overall, I would say that as long as we aren't going off the path by getting lost or are incredibly unlucky and run into a large swarm of Butterfree or Beedrill, we can survive the trek through the forest with ease. And before we continue, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying this so far, please do make sure you subscribe. Share with me in the comments any fun facts you have about animals or plants, anything along those lines. If I missed something, or if you think that maybe I'm wrong, which forests that you think are not survivable, or which ones do you think you could genuinely survive in? Comments and watch time are the #1 way to assist a YouTube channel and its reach as told by YouTube itself. And if you'd like to go the extra mile, please do consider becoming a member of the channel for as little as $3 a month. You get a number of different perks, behind the scenes stuff, and you get to hear your name shouted out at the end of every video. Maybe even come and say hi in the live streams that I do every single week here on YouTube. But without taking any more of your time, let's get right back to the topic, and once again, thank you so much for watching. Forests are aplenty within the safari zones of the Pokemon games, and so I at least wanted to give them an honorable mention. They're mostly made to be incredibly safe areas where you can encounter protected Pokemon that may not be native to the region you're in or are relatively endangered. They're fairly well controlled, but it's in the Pokemon Adventures manga that we get to see another version of it, as Red decides to ditch the safe ride through the Safari Zone and finds himself being targeted by territorial Nidoking that thought he was macking on their Nidoqueen that they were actually fighting each other for, so that way they could, mate with the Nidoqueen. This results in not only Nidoking actively hunting Red down, but also him being caught by Victreebel as part of its sacrifice and prey to help its Weepinbell friends evolve. It isn't much, but it definitely shows us an alternative side to how the safari could play out. And without the assistance of strong Pokemon, great skill, or even the protection of the facility, I doubt this is a place where we would actually survive. Taking a short trip across the water, though, we find ourselves in the berry forest of the Sevii Islands. A forest on a small islet of the coast of 3 Island, berries grow wildly in profusion, quickly replenishing those that fall off. We do find some repeat Pokemon, and anytime we get these repeats, I'm simply gonna just name them off, such as Pidgey, Pidgeotto, Oddish, and Bellsprout. I'm eventually also gonna get to the point where we kinda skip over the Pokemon that are irrelevant, the ones that are not a threat to us, or are simply, again, those repeat non-threats, just to save us time. But then again, we now have new friends and evolutions to be wary of. Such is the case for Gloom, who releases an incredibly foul odor extending over a full mile or 1.6 kilometers. Even at that distance, it is said that it can induce fainting in humans, though it could also be seen as a pleasing smell to some of you whose genetics decided that you really want to stick your head into the corpse flower that this Rafflesia is. Of course, we can also assume that the smell is better the further that you are away from it, but if it feels like it's in danger, the smell will get worse, which likely means that it can travel even further. Not that much of an issue all in all, unless you faint here in the forest, which then you are now very vulnerable and can be eaten very easily by other Pokemon, and I'd say that's a pretty big issue. For example, Weepinbell is a bit of a gluttonous Pokemon that might decide you're its next meal. Quite literally being gluttonous, by the way, since it does have the gluttony ability. It won't hesitate to eat anything at all. It does not matter how large it is, as Weepinbell would just simply cut its prey down to size, and then its acid will be strong enough to then dissolve it into nothingness but fuel for its body. How it catches any of its prey is the use of its powders, which can then cause paralysis and make you easy prey. They're also plenty common in this area, making up nearly a quarter of the population as they hang from trees, blending in with them, and sometimes falling from them when they fall asleep, their mouths being stuck wide open. So the berry forest is already looking a little dicey, but within these forests, you're also likely to run into both Venonat and Venomoth. Both of them are pretty attracted to lights as well, with Venomoth eating anything else that might be attracted to those bright shiners. The only real risk with these big bugs are that Venonat, despite how fluffy it looks, is not a Pokemon that you want to make physical contact with. This is because the fur it is noted to have releases a toxic liquid when it is touched, and then spreads when they violently shake their bodies even if they aren't touched. It being noted as fur may also sound strange, but this isn't all that different from what we may call a fuzzy caterpillar. There are plenty of different kinds. I've ran into one on the side of my house, and my entire body and instinct told me not to touch it, even though I could not remember what kind of creature it actually was, or more specifically what species it was. And this is because, while some might be okay to touch, you just should not risk touching a bug that has fur like that, in my opinion, at least the caterpillars, because those hairs, or the fur, whatever you want to call it, are more akin to spines, that when they poke you or penetrate your skin, it can cause irritation, rashes, or just other general allergic reactions. I'd like to imagine that Venonat's body is actually very similar to this, so no touchy. Meanwhile, Venomoth is very similar to Butterfree, who is a bit more of a threat if they're moving in swarms, as they will release dust-like particles that vary in color depending on their capabilities, or rather their toxic ability. Dark scales are known to be poisonous, while the lighter scales they release may cause paralysis. Breathe in both and you're in double the trouble. This whole concept of butterfly and moth Pokemon releasing toxic scales isn't going to go away anytime soon, so buckle up and cover your mouths. Venomoth is otherwise, if we can cover our mouths and ensure we don't breathe in that dust, they're just generally a non-threat in terms of attacking us, since it just wants to eat other insects. More situational danger Pokemon, though, brings us to talk about Psyduck, roaming the lands, and Golduck swimming about in the water. The situational danger is if a Psyduck passes you while it's holding its head due to a headache. There's a chance that while it's having its headache, everything around it floats or goes as far as exploding. Kind of a big deal. Even if it does use its powers at all, the headache then only gets worse. So, stress, the use of its powers, being uncomfortable, the list goes on and on as per what in the world even causes a Psyduck's headaches or makes them progressively worse. Though, there is a medicine that Cynthia created in the original Diamond and Pearl games that, could be useful for the future. Don't know how she managed to cure it, but, can we mass produce that so people aren't just blowing up left, right, and center because of Psyduck? Also, of course, it doesn't remember any time it uses its powers, so once it does use its powers, it is then feeling maybe a little bit better for a short period of time, goes back to its headache, and looks around only to realize that there's a massive amount of damage, people may be missing from the area around it, and it's going to think that somebody else did it, get confused, become anxious, and then be stressed out even more, making its headache worse and its powers grow stronger. It is a perpetual stress machine, just like a college student. Which that just means exactly what its dex entry does state, which is that Psyduck is constantly racked by perpetual headaches, meaning that there is always the danger that it could just kaboom you with its psychic power. I love Psyduck, it's cute, but at the same time, that is horrid. It and Slowpoke probably have some of the worst existences within Pokemon. At least once it does evolve into Golduck, it's no longer racked by these headaches and can use its power to its advantage. Unless you plan on ruining the water or the forest in which they reside, you have nothing to worry about with Golduck, except for when we talk about it later. Because if you do plan to mess with nature in the modern day, then Golduck will use its powers to paralyze you, physically disable you, and then drag you into the water where nobody will find you. I doubt it's eating anybody that it does this to in terms of humanity, but it's still a spooky thought all in all because you're paralyzed and now drowning in the water from a rather, it's just a duck. It's a blue duck. I'll also say now that we aren't going to consider every single Pokemon that's found in the water of every location, because there's just no point in doing so, especially if we're just trying to run through the area or escape with our lives and our Pokemon's lives. As such, Pokemon such as Magikarp or Goldeen, which don't leave the water, aren't going to be considered for this. It's also fairly irrelevant to consider Pokemon such as Slowpoke and Slowbro as, well, considering the worst that they can do is watch you as you die without helping you because they don't even realize that you're being murdered, is the murder word? Oh my gosh. Because they didn't realize that you were dying. though there is one Pokemon in the water that we only get to talk about once during this entire time that would absolutely have the chance of emerging from the water and putting not just you, but everybody and everything else in the vicinity in danger. And that would be Gyarados. The giant sea serpent needs no introduction, but if it were to ever emerge, and it is in a rage, it is known to rampage until nothing is left behind. It has the capacity to not only destroy trees in the area, but also full-on cliff faces or rocks just by slamming into them, as we have been shown in Pokemon Snap. I don't think I need to tell you how dangerous that is, but hopefully with this being a calm place in nature, we can only hope that it doesn't go on any of these rampages. But back on land and away from giant scary blue sea serpent things, more technically though, within the trees, you may find a couple of Execute. But they're not doing anything other than absorbing sunlight, so that way they can eventually evolve. The only other Pokemon that you might consider to be a threat are Drowsy and Hypno, but they are given more of a bad rap than they actually truly deserve. Both being dream-eating Pokemon, they might decide to devour your sleeping thoughts if one of the other Pokemon do manage to put you to sleep, but otherwise they are actually not attacking humans, like ever. They hardly tend to do so. In fact, there is said to be only one recorded instance in which a Hypno has kidnapped a child that it did hypnotize. Otherwise, they're only known to hypnotize people and eat their dreams when they are more desperate due to being very hungry. And I'm sure that with all the different Pokemon that are here, it's not struggling to find a meal. This ultimately is no different than any other desperate animal who, may not normally attack or eat humans or go outside of its average diet. It's doing so because it's desperate. It's like a tortoise eating a bird, which has happened. It's actually hunted down a bird. I've talked about this in a number of different videos, but it's hard to not mention it here. With that, when we look at Berry Forest as a whole, yeah, it's a bit more of a dangerous place, but not the worst. Especially if you're smart enough to keep a bunch of these berries on you, you might then be able to throw some of them at the Pokemon who think you'd be a great entree. Though, if you want to know which Pokemon you can actually throw berries at, I have a full food chain video. Despite every Pokemon mechanically eating berries within the games, their diets are vastly different in lore. On 6th Island, we find ourselves within the Pattern Bush, which is called Symbol Thicket in the direct translation. It's very lush and bush-like as per its description, though it says that it has a secret concealed in its natural growth. That secret is that it looks like part of a circuitry that you would find within a game card. More specifically, it is akin to the motherboard. That, of course, insinuates that there's a chance that the world of Pokemon may be canonically a program itself within terms of lore, at least. Of course, we know that it is a video game, but we'll gloss over that for today. It's been in a couple of other people's theories, and I think I've mentioned it here or there. This, though, is actually an incredibly safe place. There's Caterpie, Metapod, Weedle, Kakuna, Ladybug, Spinarak, and then Heracross, who is happily sticking to trees and trying to get its fill of sweet, sweet sap. As long as you don't try to take that sap that it loves by force, then it will be friendly and might even be willing to share it with you as a friend. We move to the other side of the mainland region to see the lands of Johto and walk through Ilex Forest. The trees here are often chopped and used for charcoal for fuel. Once again, we have many of the Pokemon we have already talked about and aren't really a danger, though we do keep in mind Pokemon such as Beedrill and Butterfree if you decide to headbutt a tree. Another Pokemon you might want to watch out for if you're headbutting trees is a Pineco. As it lives its life, it will continually use glue made from a special fluid that it spits out to stick tree bark to its body in thick layers. This gives it protection, and despite the heavier weight, it says that it doesn't really mind. They'll continue doing this as they get older and older, even if they don't evolve, making the largest of their kind often the oldest as well. I just want, like the world's largest rubber band ball to just be a Pineco that's lived for 1,000 years. Doesn't that sound stupid and fun? They prey upon any flying insects that happen to pass by them, with Cutiefly within Alola being their favorite prey. Otherwise, it will simply hang from a tree happily until someone shakes it while it's eating, disturbing it, and then causing it to fall and explode on purpose. And let me tell you that exploding bark can be incredibly spooky, especially when you consider the bark actually splintering and turning into incredibly deadly shards. I mean, there was like, I don't know, there's multiple occasions where very large shards of wood have split off and become projectiles due to hurricanes, and that will just pierce through concrete. It's a terrifying thought. So imagine what the bark could do to you from a pineco at such a short distance with the explosion. If I were you, I would just simply refrain from shaking trees with all the different risks that there are, especially as, once again, you should be heading home with all of your Pokemon that are fainted. Other Pokemon that wander around and can be a relative danger are Venonat if you can't refrain from hugging them, and 2 new additions with both Zubat and Paras. Ultimately, the Zubat line loves to drink blood across the board. They're not all that much of a threat in terms of Zubat specifically, assuming they aren't moving in hordes, which they won't do during the daytime anyway, because daylight actually causes Zubat to become so unhealthy that even prolonged exposure can cause burns to its skin. Gotta get that SPF 10,000 to save this vampire. At least they aren't like the vampires in a movie I just recently watched, which was actually a good movie, even though I can't remember the name of it, where the second that light touches them, they just explode. I mean, absolutely violent explosion of blood. And it's funny, but it's also a great movie all in all, and I don't want to imagine that for a Pokemon. Either way, they definitely move in much larger swarms at night, Zubat making up basically a quarter of the encounter rate, but I don't know why anybody would want to walk through the woods at night. I used to do it and used to have to do it because I used to work in a state forest, and let me tell you, it's so dark without a flashlight that you can barely see 5 feet in front of you when there isn't any moonlight. I've had a red fox sneak up on me, and luckily they're a pretty calm species all in all, so it just stared at me when I noticed it, and I had a whole-on conversation asking it why the heck was it there, and it eventually walked away. Kind of rude, honestly. Back to Pokemon, though, the only other Pokemon you might have to worry about is Paras, which I'm sure everybody's concerned about Paras ever since the Legends Arceus incidents, since their aggressive attacks that had occurred within those games. But it's hard to say if all Paras in all regions are actually that aggressive, or if it was just within Hisui. For example, Tauros and Alola are calmer than anywhere else in the world, so we can't just automatically assume that every Paras is super aggressive as they were in the times of Hisui. It's still common sense and probably smarter to be more weary of them though, because, you know, I'd rather not be chopped up by their pincers and made into food so they can feel the mushrooms that parasite upon their body and zombify them. But if they're just focused on the trees as the mushrooms command them to do, then the Paras are going to be far more focused on sucking out those nutrients than they are caring about some random person walking or running through their part of the woods. So, looking at Ilex Forest, it's actually pretty tame all in all, and arguably less of a risk, or maybe similar of a risk, to what we have with Viridian Forest. Even the water here is pretty tame with Pokemon such as Magikarp and Poliwag. Just don't go shaking the trees and you'll be fine. I don't really feel the need to talk about Celebi because it doesn't really exist here unless it's a special event, but if you really want to include Celebi as the Guardian of the Forest, who may rescue you if you're the 1 in a trillion people who are so lucky, then sure, go roll your dice. We immediately move across the water to Hoenn as we dive into Petalburg Woods. Thickly dense with trees and known to be a favorite habitat for Shroomish. Strange that it actually mentions that, since they only appear about 10% of the time, not being the highest encounter rate, but they can appear as one of the horde encounters within Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. As just one last reminder, we are including Pokemon from all versions of the games to have a better understanding of the forests as a whole. Immediately, a Pokemon appearing in packs and larger numbers is Poochyena. They may bark vigorously when alone due to them being more cowardly, but when they're in packs, they will chase and bite anything they see until they become too exhausted to run away. They're also noted to be omnivores, so anything and everything is on their menu. What I love about them, though, is that real-life hyenas are actually very intelligent and effective pack hunters. The only ones that bark and whine in the way that we usually imagine them to are the ones that are the weakest or most cowardly of the bunch. You can then easily associate this cowardly nature to be applied to mostly the youngest of the packs, making it incredibly fitting that Poochyena would act this way. But we've already seen how they attack Professor Birch, so we're already seeing how traveling without a Pokemon to keep you safe means that you're in pretty big danger, assuming that you didn't already think that. Now, in equal numbers to Poochyena, we have Zigzagoon running around and being the perfect-born natural counter to alligators everywhere with its zigzag-patterned running. They're friendly and calmer than even the original Galarian ancestors that they have and like to collect items that they find on the ground. The most aggressive thing that they do these days is that they will rub their bristly back hair against trees to mark its territory, and it avoids battle by playing dead. Which, that's something I never really realized. Zigzagoon is the raccoon Pokemon, and despite that, raccoons don't play dead. At least not to my knowledge, or to anyone else's that I could find. And then its ancestor, being Galarian Zigzagoon, is technically an Eurasian badger, and they don't play dead to my knowledge either, instead being potentially very defensive creatures depending on, what their mood is, if they're protecting their den, so on and so forth. In the end, Zigzagoon, though, is shaped like a friend, and they are friends to us. Along those same lines, we do have Slackoth, who just lazes about all day and eats no more than 3 leaves to sustain itself. It makes its nest and keeps the same one its entire life. And thanks to viewers like you, who do share information with me, I actually learned that Slackoth can actually be a good swimmer, not because it just floats down rapid rivers and miraculously survives, but because real-life sloths actually are great swimmers. They can move about half a mile an hour within water, and thanks to the extra 2 neck vertebrae that they have, they can turn their heads 270 degrees effortlessly and keep their nose above the water while swimming, making them very well adapted for it. So thank you for telling me about that and allowing me to research it further through BBC UK. Other Pokemon that are effectively entirely harmless as long as you don't slam your head onto them with the force of a Hydron Collider are Silcoon and Cascoon. But their previous form, Wurmple, is, I guess it's technically a different story if you want to be a jerk and corner them. Wurmple only aim to eat leaves as they waddle around anywhere and everywhere with their suction pad feet. It doesn't matter if they're going up a tree or up a city building. They can stick to any surface without an issue. Doesn't matter if you're on the 700th floor of a building, you are not safe from a Wurmple if it wanted to track you down and get pets from you. I don't know. They want leaf. What else would they actually want? They use the spike on their butts to peel bark off of trees, which also actually helps it get sap, but are otherwise very docile until they're threatened. And while they are a natural prey of a number of different bird Pokemon, it has been shown through Pokemon Snap that they're able to fend off a Talo with a well-placed spray of poison. And I love seeing this, because it shows that prey are really able to fight back within the world of Pokemon, just like in real life, even if we see them as having the type disadvantage. Herbivores in real life will break jaws. They'll kick and bite and scratch until the very end because they have the energy to do so, and it's literally life or death. And if they can get away, then there's a chance that a predator, or the predator that is attacking them, is then at a higher risk of passing away because it used so much energy trying to eat the herbivore, thus making it so that there's hopefully one less threat for the rabbits or any other animal that did escape. There are, of course, Talo here, but unlike their real-life counterpart, the Swallow, they aren't nearly as territorial. I remember doing field work and collecting stream water for analysis, only to see just this massive swallows rush past me and crowd the skies above. And that was just because I was within 20 or 30 feet away from their collection of nests, which were built in an underpass where the water was kind of going through. They didn't attack me or anything, but it was still very, very loud. The only other Pokemon we find here are the ones that pop up in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire after Kyogre and Groudon have been defeated or captured, being Paris, Cottony, and Phantump. We've already spoken on Paris, but Cottony is just floating through the area, likely due to the dramatic shift in the climate. With the strength of the two Titans battling and said momentary shift in the climate or weather, it should be no surprise that the winds have forcefully dragged any Cottony floating far and wide across the regions into this area. This is, of course, a more extreme version of what we might see with the poplar tree in real life, which, due to the light weight that its seeds have, good wind, and the height of the tree, said seeds can travel up to 30 kilometers or roughly 18.6 miles. As for Phantom, just don't let it, lead you astray into the woods, because the second that you are led away, you're going to get lost, and odds are you will not find your way back home. The little guy isn't trying to be malicious, they aren't trying to make you lost and die, they're just in desperate need of a friend to play with, and they don't understand that what they're doing is actually very harmful to you or I. Honestly, if we excuse the packs of Poochyena ready to rip us apart and the direct attacks of any Shroomish hordes, this place would be pretty great, as it's filled with incredibly docile or even friendly Pokemon. But we can't ignore those, and traveling alone through this forest seems like it would be a potential death sentence without a Pokemon to help, just by the fact that the Poochyena are so common. In 8 various locations, there are multiple Mirages that can appear when you are soaring on Latios or Latias, or just simply not appear at all. They are Mirages after all. They're also called Phantom Forests in direct translation, which doesn't make their appearance any less mysterious. There have been events in the Pokemon world, such as masses of Executor moving together, that could explain something like this happening, or water levels changing to allow Mirage Islands to occur, just like they do in real life, but Mirage Caves and Mountains are a little bit different. The Pokemon you can find in these vary between large arrays that are rarer or are otherwise not seen within Hoenn, and a lot of them just aren't really a threat whatsoever. Once again, this seems a little strange to consider, as the only way to get to them would be if you are flying on legendary Pokemon, meaning that you're likely going to be just fine unless a fortress you encounter in one of the forests decides to go boom if you threaten it. Along these same lines, there's the Trackless Forest, which can also be only accessible with the Latis, and it is where you can encounter all 3 of the legendary beast Pokemon. Once again, this is a very special case where you are hopefully not riding on a legendary Pokemon without any other Pokemon on your team neglecting their need for healthcare. Allowing us to move on to our next forest within the next region. Is it weird that the second that we enter Sinnoh, I can hear Cynthia's piano? You know that she canonically plays the piano, meaning that she very well may have composed her own champion's theme, which makes it that much more terrifying. But that aside, as the music fades away, as we get further and further away from wherever she is, we're in Eterna Forest, a forest enveloped in chilly air. Thick stands of trees turn the forest into a natural maze, as if we didn't need more mazes and forests mashed together. And deep in the forest is the old chateau, falling into disrepair after being abandoned by its owner. And we won't be exploring that abandoned place today, but who knows, I may have to make a video dedicated to all the different theories that have emerged over the years. October is right around the corner, but so is Legends ZA, which, yes, I will be streaming here on this channel. This forest does become a little bit messy, but for ease, we won't be considering what are labeled as special Pokemon that can only be acquired by having the Game Boy cartridge of another game within the DS. But we will still otherwise include Pokemon from different versions, such as the Great Gas that is Ghastly. While they are uncommon, I believe at about a 4%, they are floating through here thanks to the haunted home they find in the chateau being very nearby. They are also still very deadly Pokemon. They'll actively float through the area and envelop any prey that they desire in their poisonous, gaseous body, even suffocating them while absorbing their life energy. They're pretty happy here in the forest as well, considering that the trees help block any large gusts of wind from reaching them, further preventing their bodies from being blown away, which would effectively end their lives. It's just that their bodies aren't solidified enough to withstand a gust of wind that's strong enough, but as they evolve, they'll become more solidified, or at least have a better ability to control their body and the gas that composes them. We do have a slew of other Pokemon here that we've already talked about that don't serve as any threat, unless you're scared of slow-moving swarms of Slackoth, and can instead focus on the final evolutions of Wurmple in the forms of Beautifly and Dustox. Beautifly itself really isn't an issue. It likes to pollinate, and while it is one of the only butterflies or moths that don't release deadly scales, it, of course, still manages to be a threat by being so aggressively greedy that it will jab at anyone who prevents it from gathering the pollen or nectar that it loves. It does have entries talking about draining bodily fluids from prey, though Pokemon, as a game, tends to just kind of avoid everything that has to do with creatures eating a decomposing creature, which is understandable, but you may ask, why is this relevant? Because insects across the board, including butterflies, will help decompose a body in a number of different ways, which includes drinking their bodily fluids. The same ones that may also build up in the body as it goes longer and longer without being touched. I won't go into the nitty-gritty disgusting details, but every time I talk about this stuff, I think about my forensic science classes and the marbling of bodies that occurs over time. It's a fascinating phenomena, but long story short, Beautifly is acting as another decomposer within the forests whenever it needs the nutrients. But Dustox, on the other hand, has an entirely different story as we return back to creatures with dangerous scales. Said scales are just simply toxic, but they do have the capacity to make a very healthy person sick, more specifically noted to be a pro wrestler. It's because of these scales that large swarms of them are known to be a massive issue and should be stayed away from, because if they're able to make a pro wrestler sick, imagine what it could do to less healthy individuals, elderly people, or even children, who would all be at greater risk. While we aren't really focusing on what happens outside of the forest, they are noted to be attracted to lights and will swarm towards cities where they'll all eat all of the leaves on roadside trees. And all it takes then is a walk through the woods at night with a flashlight to make you the center of their attention, and I don't think you want that. Luckily, while they do appear at all times, they are fairly rare in the open areas that we travel through, though a far more common Pokemon hopping through the grass is Baneri. While it is noted to be a very skittish Pokemon that is very quick to run away, don't mistake that for it being helpless. In fact, if you somehow decide, for some reason, that you want to corner it, and you see that its ears roll up, you need to back away. These ears it has can release then from its coiled up status and have the power to then punch or create an impact that can crush boulders. The Pokedex also likes to state that apparently it could just hurt grown-ups, and considering I am a 26-year-old individual and I am a grown-up, I have to tear down this veil for everybody, unfortunately. I am not Superman, and say that my body is not sturdier than a boulder. It doesn't say the composition of the boulder, what kind of boulder it is, whether that be granite or some sort of sandstone, whatever the heck is going on, but I'm going to assume granite, as I often do, since they're the first type of rock, or rather composition of rocks that comes to my mind, and are pretty common depending on the location. With that in mind, if Baneri could crush that, even if it was a weaker type of boulder, it's still a boulder, and I'm sure I would have some broken bones if this little rabbit decided to hit me. So whatever you do, just don't corner the rabbit. But how strong are rabbit kicks? Take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt, because while I know they can dislocate the jaws of animals such as foxes with a well-placed kick, apparently they can break small bones in other creatures, but otherwise will kick hard enough to rip unprotected skin off. There was a lot of other sources that were not reliable that said that they could break larger bones, but it didn't make any sense based on the information, and they weren't really all that reliable. Though apparently rabbits also have a higher risk, or are at least more common of a risk, of actually greatly injuring or even breaking their own back due to the sheer amount of force that they output when they release their kicks. Which, while that is really sad in actuality, I kind of imagine it in a very cartoon sense where a rabbit just does one wrong kick, doing it far too hard, and we immediately watch it stand up, pull out a cane, and start walking away as if it had the cane the whole time or it materialized out of thin air. Away from my cartoonish thoughts as we move on to Budew, who we can see waddling around these parts, and there's one detail that it turns out I've misunderstood for quite some time. Because I thought that giving it clean water would mean that it would be good and fantastic and it would create less poisonous substances, when in fact it is good for Budew, but it's not good for us. Directly from the Pokédex, the pollen it releases contains poison. If this Pokemon is raised on clean water, the poison's toxicity is increased. Cleaner water, more poison. or at least stronger poison. And then when the sun hits it just right, poof, poisonous pollen that will make you do more than just have a sneezing fit. Though that's being a little bit dramatic, I think, since we don't know the full extent of said poison. We just know that at least in one dex entry, it states the pollen induces harsh sneezing and runny noses. Not really something that you would necessarily consider poisonous. I will say, or at least I believe, that that would be more akin to being an irritant. Some people are more allergic to certain types of pollen from certain plants. Some plants, like goldenrod, just release so much pollen that it has just a chance to irritate anyone and their noses or senses as a whole. This is actually why people say you're supposed to eat locally sourced honey, because odds are that the bees got their pollen from plants in the area that you live in and then turned that into honey, helping your body recognize whatever little bits of materials that go into it, because pretty much bees, oversimplifying it, add protein to their pollen and nectar, and then they create their honey. So yeah, your body is able to actually resist overreacting to when a ton of pollen is released, and then you don't have to worry about the next time that plants want to copulate with your face instead of with each other. Another non-threat in this area is Bidoof. They're agile, naive, and are just not easily perturbed, making them a perfect little guy to just walk up to, pat on the head, and walk away from there. Hopefully it doesn't just follow you home and you have 5,000 new Bidoof as your pets because they become attached to you. They just want to kind of keep their teeth at a good length by gnawing on hard objects and eating leaves as part of their primary diet. I will always find it really funny though that beavers just might really love a specific type of leaf from a specific type of tree, and then just look at any random tree and decide, I'm going to knock this one down because I can't reach the leaves that I love so much. Beavers apparently can also be incredibly specific about what type of leaves they do like to eat, which, to be fair, I would be too if all I ate were leaves and there was a constant buffet before me. There is also technically one more Pokemon you can find if you use the Poke Radar, and that's Nincada, which it also isn't a threat in the slightest, but I find it fascinating that we have to use a radar to find a cicada in the middle of a forest. I hear those little monsters all the time in the summer, but I think I've only ever seen them once, and that was this past year. They're so hard to find, and it's because they're so easily startled, while also being very difficult to track down with how sneaky they are, and when they emerge, or where they even emerge, being very specific areas that are hard to track. So this is actually making incredible sense as to why we need a scanner to find Nincada. Otherwise, Nincada is just super similar to a real-life cicada, living underground before it matures, as it absorbs moisture and nutrients from tree roots. At this point, we only have 2 more Pokemon within Eterna Forest if the forest itself wants us to be afraid of it, because otherwise it's actually seeming pretty safe if you can avoid that rare Dustox. Even if it's around during the daytime, it's probably sleeping. Now, one of those Pokemon would be Murkrow, and these are some pretty cunning corvids. Unlike your average crow as well, these Pokemon have tougher and sharper beaks, allowing them to have a wider range of food available for them to enjoy or prey to hunt. Luckily, as long as the Murkrow aren't commanded to attack us by a Honchkrow, which is luckily, again, not in this area, the worst we'd have to deal with is them potentially stealing some of our food. It's wild to think also that in real life, a crow or a raven wouldn't really be able to hunt a rabbit due to them having a tougher hide, but they might hunt down other creatures. Murkrow, in antithesis to this, does have a pretty good chance to be able to hunt Baneri down if it so pleases. Though, our last Pokemon you'd find as a threat if you have a weak heart, that is, would be Mischievous. This adorable little gal has no interest in souls, life energy, or even actually hunting any of its prey, though that doesn't mean it's not stalking anybody. Mischievous feeds on your fear, your panic, the surprise you have when it scares you. It delights in it naturally and will play tricks on you if you find yourself in the forest at night. Here's a perfect concoction of just a nightmare scenario, let's just put it that way. You're walking through the woods with a flashlight at night. You see Dustox for a moment and decide to lower your light so you can still see where you're going without alerting the horde like it's some sort of Left 4 Dead witch. Then you feel a string touch your face. You hold in a yelp of surprise as you expect a web or thread to have been the thing that touched you. But then it gets worse. You feel it. You feel more of it. It's like fine hair, silken, smooth, and flowing as you grab it and you pull it in front of you and it has a weight to it. And now, holding from your hands is a floating head as it stares at you with these vacant yellow eyes. You scream in terror as you don't realize it's just a mischievous playing a trick on you. And as your flashlight beams throughout the area and your scream rings out, it awakens the Dustox and a swarm of them moves in on your location. That happenstance aside, I'd actually say Eterna Forest would be a pretty fun stroll without much of a risk whatsoever. Genuinely, the greatest risk is if you somehow do attract a Dustox horde, which shouldn't be an issue during the day at all. And yes, I know horde encounters don't actually exist within Diamond, Pearl, Platinum or their remakes, well, Diamond Pearl remakes, but we're going by Pokemon lore and ecology standards because it's just more fun that way. While it isn't marked as a forest for some reason, Route 120 is a place that is very much a lush jungle, as it is part of what houses Fortree City. And funny enough, even if you stay out of the water and away from the tentacool that might float through, then you're still in just as much trouble as you would be in our previous forest, if not actually more trouble. Because while there are many different Pokemon here, the majority of them actually will keep their distance. Gloom can be found, hordes of Oddish, and if you're lucky to even find them, you might even run into a Kecleon. They're camouflaging themselves incredibly well and will stay out of sight from not only you, but also from the threat of the route, and we'll get there soon. Instead, we'll continue to briefly mention that over the water, you may see a Zoomerel fishing for their fill of food, Surskit gliding across the water in search of their meals, or even Masquerain flitting around above, all being nice little Pokemon that aren't going to try to hurt us. Even nicer, though, are the Tropius, walking about and consuming fruits from their favorite trees. And if you're nice enough, they may even share some of their fruit with you. But I'd pay close attention to your surroundings, because if you walk into the wrong area, all you'll get is a warning from Absol, who may appear as an omen of what's to come. Now, realistically speaking, it's actually warning you about the presence of Heatran, which is found within the Scorched Slab, that is technically a part of this route. But it's more fun to imagine that it may also be warning you about the danger of this forest. Because while a Linoone may dart past you moving at about 60 miles per hour, hopefully it doesn't run directly into you by accident and crush your bones, let alone pierce through you, since it has that sleek, almost bullet-like body. Even if it does pass you by, it's hopefully chasing something and not running away from something. Because within these woods, there are not only a slew of Poochyena, but also Mightyena who move in packs and are a natural predator of Linoone. At least within the original games, they make up half the population together, being Poochyena and Mightyena, which is a horrifying thought if you're any of their prey species, which you probably are. Mightyena can also be far more aggressive than what we'd expect of a typical hyena, while still having the intelligence and skill that true hyenas actually have. In shorter words, I hope Fortree City has contingency plans for if these Pokemon do decide to attack their city, because this is a little bit scary. Though they do no longer exist in Oris, which makes me wonder if we can actually track what happened to them or other Pokemon. What Pokemon have disappeared from areas? Have they migrated? Why did they disappear? Why are they no longer there? And if they are endangered or just simply found elsewhere. Gonna have to mark that video up for the near future. We're getting launched backwards in time and landing within the Heartwood of Hisui. This area will eventually become Route 221 and Ramanas Park as we know them in the modern day. It's a rather open area with a smattering of trees and a small river. Here we find some of the past potential threats like Beautyfly, Dustox, Zubat, and now Zubat's evolution, Golbat. Though luckily, all but Beautyfly of those appear at night, making it a little bit safer for our travels during the day, but it's also Hisui, so that's kind of a toss-up. Golbat is a bit of a major problem, with it being 5'3" or 1.6 meters tall and weighing in at 121 pounds or 55 kilograms.
Imagine that coming in like a rocket and slamming into you before it decides to drink down your blood like the glutton that it is. They actively decide to feed on both Pokemon and humans, drinking over 300 milliliters of blood in one sitting, typically. The American Red Cross states that an adult losing volume equal to half a soda can of blood would require immediate medical treatment. A soda can is roughly 355 milliliters, meaning that we are in incredibly bad shape already with Golbat. Even if Golbat does stop, usually the vampire bat that it is based on will actually have an anticoagulant, so that way it can allow the blood to flow a little bit freer. It may also have some sort of, at least in Golbat's case, disease or poison, and you and I both know that Golbat isn't going to be a kind caretaker who says, "Oh, sorry about that, I was just thirsty," and bandages us up after bleeding us dry. Golbat is a bit of a demon of the skies, and nobody really talks about it, it seems. I will say, though, that once again, thanks to commenters like you, I learned further how creatures who consume only blood manage to function. The problem with drinking blood, in terms of the animals that do it, is that there is an incredibly high iron content in it, which can prove to be fatal. So not only do these animals manage to absorb the necessary nutrients from the blood better, but they've also adapted to basically naturally avoid absorbing too much of the iron. This is incredibly vital, as they may go as far as drinking half their body weight in blood, vampire bats in specific, which would also explain why Golbat might seem incredibly gluttonous, but it's actually not. It's just doing what it needs in order to survive. Doesn't mean it's any less of a danger to us, but we can move on, as there are some combi pollinating the pretty little flowers and even helping the Cherubi and Cherum in the area flourish, all of them being docile and friendly Pokemon. The problem begins once again when we find Scyther, or rather when Scyther finds us. Because while in the games, Scyther does move fast and is aggressive, they fit into their environments so well that they can populate entire areas on their own. This is because they are in fact a very deadly Pokemon that live in groups. A leader is then chosen by being the strongest amongst that group, and between their sides, being incredibly territorial, the speed that they do possess, and their ability to camouflage with the environment that they've chosen, we might not even see them before they slice us in half for intruding on their territory. But to make matters worse, there is a commonly occurring alpha Lopunny here. You might think, oh, it's a big, fluffy rabbit. We could be friends. And I'd have to start writing your obituary on the spot while running away, because that is as far from the truth as we could get. Lopunny itself is already a Pokemon that is extremely cautious. And if it doesn't run away, then it is noted to have incredibly destructive kicks that are equated to the skill of a karate master. And now we have one that is twice the size of the regular Lopunny, ready to knock our heads right off of our shoulders the second that it sees us with those demonic red eyes that it has. I'm just saying that when a Pokemon or an animal that normally chooses flight decides to now fight, we need to choose flight. I'm marking the Heartwood as a location that I do not want to walk through, as it feels as though there is a very high chance of death, especially if I make the mistake of staying out a little bit too late. Up next, we have the Grueling Grove. It's a bit more of a unique area, as many other flying bugs return in the forms of Kobe, Beautifly, and Dustox, but we also get the addition of Burmy, Wormadam, and Mothim. Where's this? Hold on, we're gonna grab this Burmy right here. I don't know where the other two went. But the worst that Burmy can really do is gather up leaves or trash or sand in the area that you may have wanted to use for some reason, and then use it as its own little cloak that then gets fused to its body once it does evolve into Wormadam. Even Mothim, if it is a male and evolves into that, as bagworms in real life are apt to do, it's just not a threatening Pokemon at all, considering it just wants to steal honey and nectar from comb beehives. Though there are two alpha Pokemon who will appear here, one being a regular in the form of Heracross. And while normally they aren't seen as a threat to us, as we discussed earlier, we understand that alpha Pokemon tend to be more aggressive and active than their normal counterparts. A regular Heracross can already lift and throw 100 times its own weight, effectively allowing it to easily lift anything over 10,000 pounds or 5,400 kilograms. Now imagine what an alpha Heracross could do. I think the force, the absolute G-force even, of being thrown by this guy would probably allow us to break the sound barrier. To make matters worse, all of these Pokemon taking pollen or stealing sap and honey, potentially even doing so from the Combee, has made one Pokemon very upset. As at least through the main storyline, we will run into Mama Alpha Vespiquen. This Pokemon can already be terrifying, commanding its Combee to attack or even attacking itself with ferocity for daring to hurt its babies or ruin their days. And just to take it the extra step, it will not only kill you, but it will also take your body and use it for its own nourishment. The queen will eat you. As such, I think this is another area that is safe to say that I would rather stay far away from. So let's see if Hisui can somehow have one good forested area for us to travel through. The last of the forests noted here is the Wayward Wood, and spoiler alert, I already don't want to go here. The Stantler of the area are more than fine as long as you don't corner them. There are Zubat and Golbat back at night, Psyduck and Golduck, with the Golduck and Hisui being far more aggressive for some unknown reason. They will flat out what seems like Kamehameha you into oblivion with what I assume is a Hydro Pump, and I'm not down for getting my bones absolutely dusted by their torrents of water. To add to this, we not only have Paras, but its evolution Parasect, and once again, these Pokemon are oddly aggressive within the lands of Hisui. They move in swarms, they drain trees of nutrients, then they move on to the next tree as they aim to increase their numbers rapidly thanks to the mushroom commanding them to do so. They'll release masses of spores, of course, as well, which will then have a slew of different effects. Parasect is a pretty big problem not only to us, but environmentally as well. I'd be honestly willing to mark them as potentially dangerous invasive species, which I feel like I missed the opportunity to call them invasive species in my invasive species video. Nevertheless, we have Bronzor, who might be found by shaking ore deposits, but unless you decide to try and polish them like a mirror, they're not an issue to worry about. And finally, it is weird to say, especially after, me trashing on it earlier in terms of its danger, but Mothim has an alpha form in this area. They can, of course, be deadly, but once again, it's a Mothim at the end of the day. It's gonna have some pretty strong gusts of wind that it can release, but it otherwise doesn't really have anything spectacular that we get warned about regarding it in its Pokédex entries or otherwise, so maybe just sneak around it and stay away from it if you think you can and you absolutely have to get through this area. As such, I don't think I'd want to walk through this area, but if you want to take the moderate risk that there is here, feel free, it's not the worst. Flying over to Unova, we get into the thick of the Lostlorn Forest, a place noted to be where people got lost for no reason. This is a reference actually to the Dead End area actually being revealed to be an illusion, allowing the rest of the forest to be revealed to be a more wide open and windswept plain that people may have walked through and then disappeared in thanks to the presence of a Zoroark protecting the area. Zoroark aren't honestly much of a threat whatsoever. They're meant to seem like they are thanks to their Trickster Kitsune origins and lore, but they simply are very protective of their territory and the other Pokemon that it cares for, of course including its Zora children. So just don't cause any problems, and once again, you'll likely be just fine regarding Zoroark. Respect nature, not that hard. The forest is fairly safe for the most part, with tons of different Pokemon that simply enrich the environment or are very kind or strong caretakers who keep other Pokemon happy and healthy. Such Pokemon include Tranquil, who refuses to fight, Swadloon, who is spending time decomposing leaves, Leavanny, keeping the younger Pokemon safe and even clothing them, Cottony floating in the air while Whimsicott might play a harmless trick on you, Petalil and Lilligant simply basking in the sun and dancing, and Emolga, who will eat bug Pokemon and roast some berries. So it's a bit unfortunate for Sewaddle, but that's why we only find Swadloon in the open. because the Sewaddle are attacked too often by not only Emolga, who eats bug Pokemon as I stated, but also the very aggressive predator here, Venipede. Venipede is a special little guy. Its motive in life is simply attack and eat. Nice and simple, as we should all aspire to be. And it will attack anything and everything that it thinks that it can defeat. If it can't defeat it, it's not its problem anymore. And you, by yourself, running or walking without any other Pokemon to protect you, are looking like a fine meal. It is noted to be brutally aggressive, and its bite injects a poison strong enough to paralyze large bird Pokemon, which explains why, once again, we don't see Pidove, but we do see Tranquil here, because Pidove is actually at risk of being eaten by Venipede, once again, despite the type difference that they have. To make it a bit worse, they have been shown to move in large swarms in the anime, which is terrifying to me. And I might be a little bit biased because I am afraid of centipedes, and Venipede is, well, a centipede, but it's pretty cool in my opinion, so it gets a small pass. I also dug into real-life centipedes because I was really curious about just how venomous they can really be and how dangerous they are, and it is noted at least one human death has been attributed to the venom of S. gigantea, which is a foot-long or 30-centimeter centipede. In 2014, it is unfortunate, but a 4-year-old child in Venezuela was the one to have passed away after being bitten by a giant centipede, which was hidden inside of an open soda can. That's gonna haunt me for a little bit. Luckily, I don't drink soda from soda cans. Otherwise, the bites are stated to be non-threatening and are mainly a risk to children and those who may develop allergic reactions. At least there's a decent chance, though, that at least within this forest, that there are other Pokemon in the area who might be nice to you, such as the monkey trio that you can find here. They're all pretty friendly and willing to share water, berries, and even cook for you, the pan monkeys, if you didn't know who I was talking about, I realize. If you're nice yourself, then they may even provide a brief respite from any terror you might run into, kind of like a little reset Dark Souls bonfire. There are some other Pokemon you might see as a threat, because Roselia is fine as long as you don't try to take away its flowers, but hiding away in the darker or rustling grass, you'll be accosted by some potentially rarer but deadlier enemies. These include not only Roserade, but also Vespiquen and Whirlipede. And for some ungodly reason that I just do not understand completely, Roserade has become far more aggressive, luring in prey with a sweet aroma before lashing out at them with vines that contain 2 different kinds of poison. One that is slow acting, one that is fast acting, both being life threatening as it ribbon dances on your grave, styling on you if you would. I understand that it's likely just tired of being attacked by Pokemon when it was in its previous forms, and that's why it evolves into this far more aggressive and defensive Pokemon that now hunts for prey, thus ending the bloodlines before they can become a threat to its species and brethren. But the last thing I need is to smell some flowers and get whipped for it. At least with Vespiquen here, you could just not trespass on its territory, and if you are kind to it, it likely just will not rip you apart. If you help it, it might even go as far as giving you honey for free as a thank you, so they're not normally as scary as they might seem. And that Whirlipede is actually a little bit better than I had remembered, as it isn't as aggressive anymore. Instead, it will stay motionless as if this is a cocoon. It will only rotate when it feels threatened at a little over 60 miles per hour to rip apart any predators or opponents that it might have, not necessarily constantly hunting for others as its prey. I always saw this Pokemon as one that I should be afraid of, but it turns out that it might just be friendlier overall. Not that I'd want to necessarily find out, because even if it doesn't rip me apart, then it will still stab me with all those poisonous spikes that it has, and I'm not down for finding out what that feels like. The only other threat here on land would be Pinsir, who is known to be quite a bit more aggressive. They're able to crush you tightly with its horns until you snap in half like a Kit Kat bar, and I personally like staying in one singular collective piece. So while this forest might seem intimidating, it actually isn't all that bad, especially when you consider that waddling around here are some Audino who'd be more than happy to also jump out of the brush to heal you up, as it's in their nature to do so. And ultimately, the worst that can happen here will really only happen when you dig deeper into the forest. going where you shouldn't and going off of the beaten path, which just don't do that. So I'd say while this forest is not necessarily fun, it is definitely survivable, as long as there isn't a horde of Pokemon rushing from the inner forest and putting you in danger.
The inside of Pinwheel Forest is actually very similar to Lostlorn Forest, but we have the addition to Pokemon in hidden grottos, who we won't really talk about since they're just kind of way off the beaten path and stick entirely to themselves unless we actively bother them. And instead, we're going to focus on the new couple of Pokemon that we do find here. In one such case, we do have Vigoroth, who is so full of energy they're just running around, attacking everyone and smashing apart trees in a berserk-like trance. They can't even stand still or sleep because once they do, their blood becomes incredibly agitated over time, and they will begin to rip and tear until nothing is left. This in turn causes it to get hungry, keeping it permanently hungry as it's constantly using energy, and we end up with a hangry Beyblade on our hands. Though I think the most terrifying Pokemon here is very rare at the least, luckily, as we have the 8'2" and 2.5 meter tall, or long I suppose, Scolipede. It moves fast. It will stab you with its horns and slam you into the ground over and over and over again as poison seeps into your body with deadly power. That is its hunting method. I do not care who you are, I don't care how strong you are, or how fast you move, you are not going to be escaping a Scolipede once you run into it. You may as well write your last will and testament if you can manage to do so before you are skewered. Once again, though, we could say you'd be fine in this forest otherwise, especially if you actually stay on the path. But once you decide to wander around the forest, you are very strongly inviting death to your doorstep. We'll be skipping White Forest because thanks to it being a strange, dream-like place that has its encounters dependent on the people who appear there, or maybe it's people who are falling asleep and then they appear there as part of like a lucid dream. I'm not really sure. There's no real point in talking about the Pokemon that do appear there because they're incredibly peaceful. Another hop, skip, and a jump, and we're standing in Santalune Forest within the Kalos region. I'll say it now, this might be the safest forest we've walked through. Caterpie, Metapod, Weedle, Kakuna, Pikachu, the Pan Monkeys, and then the additions of Fletchling and Scatterbug. Fletchling is noted to be very friendly and known for its beautiful songs, which is really funny because those songs are actually just warnings to their own kind. They are noted to be territorial though, so just leave their nests alone and they probably won't swoop down on you. Though they might just be territorial towards other birds, so you might even be more fine than we think, which would explain why we actually don't see any other bird-type Pokemon here, or flying-type Pokemon, I suppose. Meanwhile, Scatterbug might have a powder that causes paralysis if you touch it, but they're just trying to defend themselves from birds that would prey upon them. Otherwise, they're just spending their time eating poisonous leaves and poisonous roots, which just serve as a very nice control measure against whatever Pokemon's equivalent of poison ivy may be, since that can get out of control in various areas in real life. Kinda nice, actually, to be able to know that there is at least one forest that is absolutely positively safe for us to walk through. It's a real change of pace, I'll admit. Route 20, though, does have the potential of being the deadliest location if you decide to try and harm nature in any way. If you're a friend with nature, you respect it, and you stay on the path as you should, you will be perfectly fine. And in fact, there may be Pokemon who may be friendly or even try to protect you if you are in danger. This might be another location that is theoretically the safest. The path that was created here was designed to disturb the woods as little as possible, which in turn is in respect towards not only the Zoroark that reside here, but also the Trevenants. They get a real bad rap in lore for being terrifying monsters, but that was thanks to old lumberjacks wanting to chop everything down and convincing people that Trevenant was purely evil. They absolutely aren't, and just want to keep the forest and the little critters inside of it safe, and their homes. So if you defy them, then they're going to have the entirety of the woods working against you, as all of the trees are part of their own central nervous system. They trap you in a maze, potentially in a wooden cocoon and coffin, and then you just die from starvation or whatever else. Honestly, the deadliest Pokemon here may in fact be Amoonguss in terms of who's going to attack you, who's not, because it is actively preying upon anything that it can affect with its spores. They're going to primarily take residence close to water, which is actually incredibly smart, considering not only are mushrooms going to be about 80% water, depending on the mushroom, but by staying near sources of water, it can ambush any creature that draws near.
Think of it this way. Either the animal, with its full strength, comes near the water and you ambush it, or an animal has been avoiding the water because it's afraid of any ambush predators, and now it's weaker, and now that it's come to you, you can take it easier. It's like a funny little mushroom crocodile thing going on. Just to at least let you be aware of the other Pokemon that are here, there are Jigglypuff, Noctowl, Gothorita, Sudowoodo, and the occasional horde of Fungus, which I guess I should have mentioned earlier, but Fungus really aren't a threat unless you do manage to get a really big whiff of their spores from getting too close to them and trying to pick them up because you thought that they were a Pokeball. Just don't pick up Pokeballs in the forest if you're trying to stay alive, and you're going to be just fine. I'm surprised, but I think I can very definitively say that the forests within Kalos are the safest we've encountered and may end up being the safest we will encounter. And knowing what we do run into next, I really don't think that's going to be changing. Across the waters and into the tropical islands of Alola, we crash into the lush jungle. By the way, not do I only have streams on this channel, but I've also been running a Pokemon D&D campaign that takes place in Alola that you should absolutely check out if you want a good story, some good laughs, and some strong drama between the characters. But this is a heavily wooded tropical rainforest that is famous for producing ingredients for delicious meals thanks to Mallow and her restaurant. This is another great area, honestly, where you'd have to go off the beaten path in order to enter the forest to begin with, but let's talk about it anyway because I find this jungle to be incredibly fascinating. While yes, there are Paris and Parasect here, there are also their rivals Morlul and Sonotic who are keeping them in check and are caring for the forest, making sure not only it survives, but that it also thrives. They could take life energy from anyone and anything and transfer it wherever they want, potentially back into the forest that they care for, which is what they often do, making sure that the greedy Parasect don't cause too much damage in their greedy feasting. In fact, every Pokemon that we do find here is a Pokemon that chooses to coexist within the forest and serve it and each other, allowing it to become as lush as it is. And if they don't necessarily serve it directly, they are incredibly important for this ecosystem. The Paras are necessary because they get rid of the dead trees or dying trees, kind of speeding up the process. Caterpie and Metapod just eat leaves. Well, Metapod doesn't, it just kind of exists, you know, but nevertheless, Bonsly and Sudowoodo also just kind of exist. I'll be real, their niche in the environment is something I still haven't figured out yet 100%, and they're just kind of great at mimicking trees and running away. Maybe they help, you know, ensure that the bug population is kept down if they have to fight. I'm not really sure what you do. I'm looking at the little thing that hangs here. You know what, let's take a small side tangent. We're this far. I haven't done a tangent in a while that's this strong. So I ended up going to a convention, and during that convention there was a very, very nice, very sweet lady who actually was had a Pokemon stand. I ended up talking with her for a little bit, and then I said that I do Pokemon content, just kind of talking about it in general, and I shared all the information that I knew about Sudowoodo because it was her favorite, and she was so kind and so sweet that she ended up giving me for free this little Fighting for My Life Metapod sticker. And I'm going to cherish that for a long time because, yeah, sure, it's like a $2 sticker. It is one of those things where it's a very kind gesture, and I'm a sucker for very kind gestures between humans. And of course, my friend and I that I went to that convention with ended up buying this little charm that has a terrarium Sudowoodo with a little red-eyed Oddish, which I assume is just a doll of some sort. But, you know, if it's not, I don't know what to say. And it's gonna stay here for God knows how long. Anywho, side tangent over, and we're moving away from Sudowoodo. We also have Fomantis and Lurantis, with Lurantis being the guardian totem Pokemon for this area, alongside the assistance of Comfey, who can enrich the health of plants, and Wild Castform, who can manage to bring great weather to this place. Even the Passimian and Oranguru we find here are massive contributors to the environment, as Passimian will hunt down fruit to eat, while also throwing fruit that they don't eat, which allows new seeds to burst from them and actually spread within the forest. Oranguru, on the other hand, helps command other Pokemon, and Trumbeak will actually often appear as an SOS aid for either of these Pokemon, showing how they work together as Trumbeak either takes the seeds that Oranguru is telling it to and spreads the seeds in the forest, or
will actually end up picking up the seeds that are left behind by Passimian and use those as they shoot the seeds out of their beak, and again, it spreads them throughout. And all the while, Trumbeak and Hoothoot will actually in turn keep the insect population in check, as Trumbeak uses those seeds to also hunt for prey, not for consumption. The only technical outlier here is Gumi, but they're just enjoying the humidity and abundant leaves here. You could say because they are a gastropod, you could state that they are some sort of decomposer, so they do fit in, and we have most, if not all of our niches taken care of in Lush Forest. Otherwise, there are still Bounsweets and Steenie, who are sturdy fruits basking in the sunlight and avoiding the attacks of Trumbeak, while Pinsir may arguably be the only other threat here, even if they are rare. I'm sure they're just more focused on eating sap, since they're really the only one that's here that has sap as a major portion of their diet because they love it so much, thus making even this threat fairly neutralized as long as you leave it alone and don't try to steal its sap. So surprisingly, despite the dense population, we can consider Lush Forest to be a relatively safe, if not fully safe place. Stepping through an Ultra Wormhole, it's really hard to not at least mention both Ultra Forest and Ultra Jungle, even if they are an entirely separate universe, where you have to get to them via Solgaleo or Lunala, which makes this very similar to the Latios situation. Who knows, maybe you got sucked up in an Ultra Wormhole and dropped off in either of these locations, I don't know. In the case of the Ultra Forest though, you'll find individuals that at least seem like humans, known as the Cartenvoys or Cartanenvoys, envoys of the Ultra Beast Kartana. And they seem to desire peace and don't even use Pokeballs with their Kartana when they do battle you. Otherwise, the entirety of this place is similar to that of the Japanese rock garden, a place of peace. So hopefully, if you're not looking for trouble, you won't actually be accosted by these guys. Meanwhile, with the Ultra Jungle, we do have a very different story, as the place is littered with Buzzwole. And as much as I love Buzzwole because it is my favorite Ultra Beast out of all of them, there is nothing that could convince me to go near one that isn't 100% confirmed to be friendly, let alone going to their home planet. They actively choose to drain not the blood, but the life energy of others, which it turns into muscle in its own body, making it stronger, and less defeatable over time. How that works, it does not matter, it just does, and what does matter is that I don't want to get turned into a deflated balloon when 10 of them descend on me at once. As such, pretty bad place all in all, and I don't think I really needed to say that, but it is a high risk of death. In the Isle of Armor, off the mainlands of Galar, we find the Forest of Focus. I have to admit, when I first looked at the massive Pokemon that can be found here, it's intimidating, and it reminds me just how much I really need to get to it, but am nervous about the massive work that will need to go into the complete ecology of Galar. If you're unaware, the complete ecology series is basically me going route by route, teaching real ecology and how Pokemon ecology actually works within the world, and I've completed from Kanto to Alola. I was about to say Kalos, but it's all the way through to Alola at this point. Legends of ZA is going to be the next one that I'm going to do, and then I'm going to have to get to Galar. And then we could go to Legends Arceus, but that's neither here nor there, and I cannot avoid studying the environment here. Now, there are not only Pokemon that will jump out of the grass at us, now known as hidden encounters, but also there are Pokemon that are wandering around outside of the forest and inside of it. Of course, we're going to be focusing on the ones that are inside, but this is important to at least talk about because it's otherwise a very massive area that can be mixed up if not looked at closely. Hidden in the grass, we have plenty of Pokemon like Pikachu, Chansey, and Blissey, all of them being friendly, and the latter two, of course, being incredibly so, and potentially even being willing to heal us if we're in a spot of trouble. Other Pokemon that aren't threats are Corphish, eating everything that it can, Tangela, trying to eat everything that it can but failing and making do with sunlight until something eats it, and then Zora appearing in foggy weather since it can disguise itself and play tricks on us. Gumi's around during thunderstorms, and Fomantis on sunny days. We do get the return of Oranguru and Passimian at all times, all weather, and even Krogunk makes an appearance while being pretty docile towards humans as they don't fight unless necessary. Once again, do not corner the Pokemon and you will be fine. The problems do start with Venipede, who actually make up between a third to slightly over half of the encounters of the Pokemon hiding away in the grass, depending on the weather. There are some fungus hiding around as well, but there are 2 Pokemon that are much larger threats depending on the weather. If there is a sandstorm, you have the chances of being ambushed by a Silicobra jumping out of the ground as it was waiting for prey. Luckily, they aren't venomous snakes and instead specialize in shooting sand at their enemies in order to defeat them, or at least incapacitate them in some capacity. We're not really on their list of prey, but I still don't want to be shotgun blasted by masses of sand. The other Pokemon that actually truly is a genuine problem is Ponyard, who will jump out from the brush onto our backs, our calves, whatever weak spot that there really is, and repeatedly stab us until we fall and they can finish us off. This is almost literally what they do, as they are stated to immobilize their prey, and they don't care what they're eating. As long as they're able to eat it, they're going to attack, and I've got to say, we're probably pretty edible. I'm not a cannibal, so I at least assume as much. I already think that this place is going to be really rough, but let's continue anyway and see just how nasty it can get. Remember though that Galar is stated to be an incredibly harsh environment, meaning that only some of the toughest Pokemon make their homes here and thrive. It's how Obstagoon came into existence after all. Though inside the forests, our threats expand from just Amoonguss and Pinsir and now include a wandering Quaddont. The wandering encounters are a little bit tricky since they only occur with the right weather and there is only one of them moving around, but since it's consistent, I'm just going to assume that there is a relative population within these areas that we can study. For example though, this Quaddont appears with rainy weather as it needs to stay wet in order to breathe, which is exactly how real-life crawfish function. They need their gills to stay wet in order to draw oxygen from the air, otherwise their gills will dry out and effectively no longer work and they'll suffocate on land, which is horrifying. And these are pretty aggressive Pokemon as well, fighting pretty much everything and anything that its eye catches, and making it so that there are no other Pokemon in the area beside itself, at least when it comes to the ponds that it likes to live in. If you see one, you're better off running away from it. There is a Raichu that will appear during thunderstorms, but they're also typically not going to pick a fight with you, assuming that they don't have an excess amount of electricity built up in their system. They're just enjoying the thunderstorm and probably hoping to get struck by lightning to refuel themselves is my assumption. Sandslash will also appear during sandstorms, but they aren't going to be bothered with us as we're not part of their balanced diet, which is typically going to be small rodents, snakes, and then berries. The small rodents and snakes is something that I pulled from the Ecology series, as you can kind of see that they're often on the same routes as Ekans or other snakes in general. We have the Silicobra here, for example, and on top of that, the animals that they're based on do end up eating small snakes. I'd still stay away from them though, because their claws are pretty incredibly sharp, and I'm pretty sure they will make a donut out of us. Then for some reason that I can't quite figure out right now, and I'm not really, interested in figuring it out until I have to do the ecology, is Wigglytuff, who appears during foggy days. But it's also not a threat unless you decide to bother it. And moving into another section of the forest, you may find yourself encountering Scolipede on a cloudy day and Tangrowth on a sunny day. Tangrowth may be known to eat fruit, but it also apparently hunts prey by wrapping its arms around them, and those arms extend incredibly far, so I don't think we really stand much of a chance. It might even be able to grab us far before we even get to see it, as it wraps its vines around the trees, snaking them between, and then grabbing us. Then, just like as we saw with Quaddont, Axelgor will appear on rainy days because it needs to keep its membrane coverings moist. It's the only thing that prevents its body from actually drying out. It isn't a threat to us, but it's really cool to note, and the same can be said about Escavalier, who appears during sandstorms, further explaining why Axelgor can be found here, since Carablast and Shelmet need each other in order to evolve, which kind of a wrong thing to say if we want to talk about it on a lore standpoint, because Carablast needs Shelmet to evolve, as it just steals Shelmet's armor. Meanwhile, Axelgor's kind of forced into this new form in order to keep itself alive. A questionable Pokemon is Luxray, who appears during thunderstorms. They aren't necessarily fond of us approaching them, and if Legends Arceus tells us anything, they might be a tad bit more aggressive as they live in packs and hunt prey. and it isn't as if we can really hide from them either. They have X-ray vision to see through objects, making it effectively useless to do anything but try to fight them if you are ever cornered by them, because you are definitely not going to be able to run away from them either. The realization that there is a predator like this that already has a likely strong sense of smell, incredible physical capabilities, has now been given X-ray vision, is now actually one of the most terrifying realizations I have come to if I myself were prey within the world of Pokemon. Like, I get there's a lot of Pokemon in general that are just souped up, roided up animals, but at the same time, at least a lot of those animals, you can hide behind a rock. You can stay quiet and you'll be fine. There is no hiding from Luxray, unless it's, behind a metal slab, I suppose. I think it's clear that this area is incredibly dangerous, and you should just never step foot into the Forest of Focus without a proper team of Pokemon, which is kind of the point anyway. I have a feeling I might say something similar about the rest of the Galar's forests, but I have to give them the benefit of the doubt, and we have to go through them without just making those assumptions. So let's move on. The Glimwood Tangle is known to have many maze-like paths that are perpetually dark, only lit up by the mushrooms there. Bioluminescent mushrooms are ballin' in real life, by the way. I want to go to an area where I can hopefully see them in their full vibrance. There's a lot of different areas I really need to go to study these things in person, rather than just reading peer-reviewed articles and stuff like that. I feel like I'd make it more special, and I could have actual footage for you guys. Despite this information, though, plenty of people live their lives within the forest as part of Balanley. There are actually plenty of Pokemon here, such as Phantom, Shiinotic, Oranguru, and Pissimian, again, alongside the very kind Indeedee, which likely serve as a guide for those that become lost, since they do enjoy assisting others and gain energy from it. There are Spritzee flittering about and eating seeds and flowers, Swirlix getting their fill of sweets, and are only a threat if they don't get enough, as any other animal would be for that matter, and Sinistea, who isn't a threat unless you drink from it, and Galarian Ponyta, who is an absolute friend unless you decide that you want to be evil, and then it kind of just runs away anyway. Overall, the forest seems like a pretty great place until we run into the witch and gremlin that reside here. Technically, they're both witches if you look at their potential inspirations, but that's besides the point here. When we talk about Impidimp and Morgrem, actually, as one of those units, what they enjoy doing most is simply making you irritated. They are a troll brought to real life, and they will irritate you before getting energy from your irritation, and then attack you or simply ambush you, whatever it might be. Literally any dirty tactic that they can employ is one that it will absolutely do in order to get the upper hand. Feed on your negative energy, and overall put your face in the dirt. They honestly, though, despite all this, aren't too much of a threat as long as you don't actually try to fight it or make them irritated. They are effectively bullies, though I can kind of forgive them because their final form in G-Max is ballin'. It's like Gurmagon. Meanwhile, of course, the cotton candy princess of the forest is the one that you should be most afraid of here as we look at Hattrem. Don't know where the Southern came out, but here it is. Straight from the Pokédex, no matter who you are, if you bring strong emotions near this Pokemon, it will silence you violently. And, to add to this, one blow from those braids would knock out a professional boxer. I am not a professional boxer, nowhere close. I will die, probably. The reason why, though, it is so violent against others with strong emotions is because it can hear these emotions as if they were incredibly loud noises. The stronger the emotion, the louder the sound, making this Pokemon feel overwhelmed and wanting to do everything it can in order to shut them up, and I don't blame them, honestly. So if you manage to enter this forest with a calm and collective mind, you should actually be perfectly fine here, and we can consider this place to be very safe for you. You might even be able to live in Balanley if you so wished to live your cottagecore mushroom life. I'm also not sure why I decided to work backwards within Galar, but here we are within the Slumbering Weald. This is also where we encounter Zacian and Zamazenta for the first time within the games, and they don't do anything to harm us, and we can't harm them. They're also pretty strange because it's questionable whether we actually encountered them or we encountered some sort of
projection of their spirit, since we are unable to actually hit them within the terrain that is all sorts of mist going on. Away from them, though, for now, we find Hoothoot eating Grubbin, who is in turn eating hummus, or humus, within this area. Squavit is moving about, probably also avoiding Hoothoot, and stuffing its cheeks with berries. Rookity, which are honestly about as territorial as any other blackbird would be, but you can kind of just yell at them and they leave you alone, at least in real life, that was my case. While also they prey upon Grubbin, and then Blipbug, who just kind of exists and hopes not to get eaten anytime soon, and will one day make its way back to a garden or some other area where it can eat tomatoes or carrots or whatever the heck it wants to, I guess. Even when we dig into the northern area of the Weald, the encounters are definitely more dangerous if the Pokemon actually cared about us, which, newsflash, they really don't care as long as we don't hurt them, or the Weald. Butterfree, Galarian Weezing, who is only dangerous if you breathe in the green gas, Corviknight, who is already friendly enough to humanity to be our partners for taxis, and Orbeetle, who cares more about working out at the library than spending time even noticing us. There's also a Munna here, not a Musharna, a Munna, a straight up level 45 Munna, which may be feasting on the dreams of our legendary dogs while they sleep, and is very likely the reason why we couldn't make physical contact or attack the legendary dogs, because they aren't even there. They were still sleeping, and it was a weird realization to have seen this, and I might need to dig into Galar and lore and all this other stuff regarding anything related back to this, because Galar has some really interesting lore. It just kind of dropped the ball in terms of the game itself. All the other media seems to do well. But the only threat that is actually here is one that only exists if you're not paying attention and either try to pick up a Pokeball or step on it accidentally, resulting in Galarian Stunfisk snapping down on you like the bear trap that it actually is. They don't care what gets into their trap, they just care about getting their next meal. So if you can, just manage to pay attention to where you're going and not walk straight into any of these threats, I'd say the Slumbering Weald is a safe place. And even though the entirety of the purpose of the Slumbering Weald is how we are told that we shouldn't go in there because it's dangerous and it's off limits, but we kind of go in there anyway, it may have not actually been that dangerous, and it's just to try and make sure people don't go in there, as it is propaganda spread by the Galarian royalty, which would make a lot of sense considering that they wanted to ensure that nobody else could be the heroes, and they also appear in the post-game at the same shrine where Zacian and Zamazenta had been resting. We have reached what is technically the semi-final region, as we are within Tagtree Thicket inside of Paldea, and it's pretty dense with Pokemon. Returning Pokemon include Venonat, Venomoth, Murkrow, Pineco, Zora, Fungus, Oranguru, Passimian, Psyduck, Impotent Morgan, Pawniard in the rocky area, and then in the flower area we have Chansey, Vespiquen, and Fomantis. Now, there are so many freaking Pokemon here, but I'm going to have us focus on what is the most relevant of them, since Pokemon like Dunsparce are just going to book it the second that they catch a glimpse of us, or Pokemon such as Flabebe or Florges, I think it's just Florges here, is not going to really do anything at all. Maybe it might heal us, kind of a toss-up, right? For example, we could consider Spidops to be a threat since it is known to lay traps down for prey to cross and then, get stuck in, or even using a number of different ambush tactics to strike at their prey before they even know they're in danger. It's, Black Ops, Special Ops, Spidops, that's their whole point. Considering its size and how a lot of spiders are not really all that picky in terms of what they eat as opportunistic eaters, primarily opportunistic carnivores, I would rather not risk being caught in the webs that they create, which a Scyther can't even cut through. We're also lucky that it is Toadschool here and not Toadscruel, because while Toadschool is a coward that runs away at 30 miles per hour and just likes to take nutrients from trees, Toadscruel is the one that will jump at us very threateningly and then rip all of our nutrients out of our body while we're still alive until we're a dried husk and no longer alive. It's a painful process, and we don't even get to get knocked out for it. Even Shroodle and Grafaiai aren't problems as long as you don't bother them. Shroodle being pretty calm and unbothered, while Grafaiai being territorial against any other living thing, including their own kind, but at least it marks its territory very clearly, making it very easy to avoid, which is why we should stay on the path. Otherwise, if it feels like it's in danger, it can use its poison to immobilize you for up to 3 days, leaving you completely defenseless to any of the other creatures that would like to eat you. Grafaiai has no interest in eating you, it just enjoys some delicious bugs. There are other Pokemon that live along the riverside, such as Dreadnought, who will lie in wait, lurking as many other snapping turtles are apt to do, so that way they can ambush their prey and snap their strong jaws down on them. You don't even need to be right against the riverbanks, because its neck can extend quite a bit to reach you, so just stay far away from the water altogether. And if that wasn't enough for you to stay away from the riverside, then the aggressive and pugilistic Flamigo will absolutely change your mind, I hope. Unless you like getting physically attacked by Pokemon. I guess if you're studying Pokemon moves like Kukui, that's a different story, but whatever. Flamigo will not hesitate to attack and will do so in groups in perfect harmony with each other, and will ensure that nobody else in the area exists besides them if no other Pokemon can stop them, effectively being greasers that push everybody out of their territory. Apparently they also tie the knot that's at the base of their neck so that way the energy stored in its belly doesn't escape its beak. I expect it to get like a hyper beam or some sort of ability that is related to that, but not really. So don't be surprised if Flamigo does eventually get an evolution in the distant future, because that just seems like an extremely strange detail that wasn't picked up on. Though it could also be the only explanation that's available as to why it has the body of a boxing glove. There's also Knucklestack here, which gets a little bit strange considering that while it does hunt for prey, it isn't stated what that prey actually is. I'd like to think that it could be anything, but it's very unclear. They do, however, decide to shoot salt at their enemies in order to rapidly dehydrate and effectively cure them for whatever nutrition these Pokemon need. Imagine being fast dried to a husk by the Minecraft Pokemon. I do like it, just not in its 3D form all that much. It's a lot of 2D Pokemon just kind of end up looking better to me. Otherwise, while there are plenty of other Pokemon, as I have mentioned ad nauseum, the last one here that might serve as a threat is Viridian, because of course the butterfly once again sheds scales that are poisonous to us. So I think I'm going to stay far away from these woods, the Tagtree thicket as it is, and I'd rather live. I choose to live. Thank you very much. Finally, in brief, we have the timeless woods of Kitakami. There are only 2 notable encounters, being Ariados, which ambushes you, and then eventually you will come across Ursaluna, or rather Blood Moon Ursaluna. I realize this is now the 3rd time that I've ended a video talking about Blood Moon Ursaluna, but oh well, what can you do? Nevertheless, this Pokemon is an earthbending bear yokai that is representative of not only how long it takes for peat to be formed, but also the idea of a creature living for extended periods of time that can then become an Oni. In this case, the bear becomes the Onikuma, which is the demon bear, essentially. Simply a stronger, larger bear that now stands on its back legs exclusively, terrorizes humans, and is a massive threat, which matches the change between normal Ursaluna and this form, the Blood Moon form, which is not an actual evolution. I think it's pretty clear that you don't want to be anywhere near this Pokemon, and staying out of the Timeless Woods is easily the best option for your safety. In conclusion, I'm gonna personally say the safest forest is either of the Kalos forests, more specifically the Santalune forest if you really want me to choose. There's genuinely no real threat there whatsoever, unless you're being an idiot. Meanwhile, the most dangerous forest has got to go to Galar's Forest of Focus, which is filled to the brim with deadly Pokemon, with runner-up being the Tagtree Thicket of Paldea, since it brings a lot of incidentally and purposefully dangerous Pokemon together that we talked about from all the other regions in one place, and then adds more. But what do you think? What forest would you hope you never get stuck in the middle of your journey? Comment it below, as I stated earlier, because I do love reading the comments when I have time, and both comments and watch time are the #1 free way to help boost a video's reach, as told by YouTube itself. You can also hype the video, which would be dope. I don't really know the full extent of it, but go for it. And since you did make it this far, thank you for watching, and please do make sure that you subscribe. I have literal days worth of content for you to watch. I release content weekly, and if you'd like to go the extra mile to support the channel,
new tech for this and to make videos better, become a member of the channel for as little as $3 a month, either here or on Patreon. You get a number of different perks, behind the scenes stuff. You get some just nice Q&As or just prioritized responses, and you also do get your name shouted out at the end of every single video, which we're gonna go do right now. Thank you to all of our members of the channel, starting with the Gods of Hope, Quill, Final Fantasy 14, Heals for Life, Biggins, Vatty, Knit, Buzzin, Summer, then our Champions, Ian, Costa, Joshua, Biggins, Wilson, then the Knights of the Court, Zoomster, Vatty, Lemon, Kelsey, Hoover, Covers, Luke, Sasty, Crumbo, Veal, Moth, Romance, Shiny, Gems, Zero, Verse, Voice, Fix, My Night, Quill, Final Fantasy 14, I always mess up on that, Plow, Allen, Heals for Life, Blue, Dalek, Ward, Hepfil, and Bass Molar. Then all of our wanderers of the channel, Beazle Bay, Ruby, Jellin, Dean, Sporting Emperors, The Lakes, Keep Moving Forward, Suki, Satsuki, 232, The Black Dragon, Knit, Ruthless Hauser, Michael Stein, Jay Gill, Jacob Square Star S, Mr. Hellhound Yips, Super Saiyan Son, Goku, Emil Wickstrom, Irish, I Was Drunk, Voidy Reaper, JC Hero, Ocean Man 7, Devorian Skies, Indoor Fossils, Ryan Schwank, Shoe Patch the Limit, G-Dory Phoenix, 1, Vanessa Maru, Yagal, Cal, Snake Sand 520, Kageo Tsutsuki, Cool Breeze, Eric, Max Supreme, Shadow Hawk 19, Lost Wisteria, Zakai, Pyro Master, Abdallah Alati, Gaming Runes, Night Owl 707, Evil Chan, Micah 626 Gaming, Nicole Manassian, Kristen, Sandwich Boss, Emmy, whatever this is, Alona Figment, Manico, TH73, Sydney House, Miss Zora, Dakota Couch, Brad Sundimer, Drixel, Carl Jean, Hunter Al, Hussein Kassam, Rebecca Colin Hugh, Jappy W, Memento Mortem, Morshi, Edward Kosowski, Fennica Fox, Hag Addy, Cadabra, King Pie, Jack the Frost, Richard Ivy, Addy C, DJ Monk 23, Squid Water, Rice Smith, Gamer, Bad Dragon Knight, Just JM, Empty Horse with a Cocktail, Muse, Artworld, Tolumiel, Gwendolyn, Eastgander 072, Andrew Frost, Big Anonymous, Summon Sloth, the Knock Nuya, Ian Ray, Big and C9, Corner the Cop, A Sleepy Bear, Jericho, Michael Vale, Unseelie King, The Morning Guys, Daniel Tracy, Garrett Huffman, Dylan Peters, Malachi Burkhardt, and Heather Weisnett. Thank you all for being members of the channel. It does help immensely. I know right now YouTube's going through a big old change and it's messing with a bunch of stuff right now. YouTubers all across the board, big and small, are just affected, and the extra support goes a massive extra mile. So thank you so much for your generosity, and as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't do anything I want to do. Don't think I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye.